My name is Sarah Bennett. I'm 30 years old, one day from becoming a mother for the first time, and in less than 24 hours my entire life was going to be unrecognizable. The hospital bag had been packed and repacked 3 times, sitting by the front door like a countdown clock. The tiny blue blanket sat folded on top, a small soft square that I touched every time I walked past it, just to remind myself this was real. The car seat was finally installed after 3 days of begging, 3 days of watching Ryan promise tomorrow, while he scrolled through golf scores on the couch. I thought the next time I walked out of that house, I'd be gripping my husband's hand through contractions, terrified but not alone. Instead, I stood in the driveway with my water breaking, one hand pressed hard against my belly, watching my husband check his watch like I was making him late for a dinner reservation instead of announcing the birth of his son. His parents were already sitting at the airport gate. Their golf resort trip, booked weeks earlier, apparently mattered more than his wife going into labor on the concrete in front of him. I asked, quietly at first, for the hospital. He looked at the passenger seat, then at the luggage stacked in the back, and said he'd be fine, call a taxi, call an Uber, the tickets were non-refundable. Then he got in and drove away, and I watched the SUV shrink at the end of the street until it turned the corner and was gone. I didn't scream after him. I didn't chase the car down the driveway in my soaked leggings. I just stood there shaking, one hand on the garage door for balance, realizing that the man who'd promised at our wedding to protect our family had abandoned us before our son even took his first breath. But here's what he didn't know, standing there checking his phone for boarding passes, someone had caught the entire thing on camera. And by the next morning, while he was ordering coffee in an airport terminal 1,000 miles away, his perfect little vacation was about to collapse into the worst week of his life. Before I tell you exactly what I said to him when he finally called me, sobbing, begging me to explain what was happening to his career, tell me where you're watching from today, and tell me if you've ever watched someone reveal exactly who they are the moment it costs them nothing to be decent and everything to be selfish. Ryan Coleman didn't become this man overnight. That's the part that still keeps me up some nights, because if he had, I could have seen it coming, packed a bag, left before I was 39 weeks pregnant and completely dependent on him. But it wasn't overnight. It was 100 small betrayals that I explained away one at a time. In public, Ryan knew exactly which version of himself to perform. At his company's summer barbecue, he kept one hand resting on my back the entire afternoon and told his coworkers he couldn't wait to be a dad, his voice pitched just loud enough for the people around us to hear. On social media, he posted photos of the nursery, the soft gray walls, the little wooden mobile shaped like clouds, with captions about family blessings and new beginnings that got dozens of comments from people who had no idea what our house actually sounded like at 7 at night. Inside our home in Greenville, South Carolina, the truth wore a completely different face. I was 39 weeks pregnant, swollen in my ankles and my hands, exhausted in a way I hadn't known a body could be exhausted, and I was still doing almost everything alone. I folded the baby clothes into tiny stacks. I ordered the diapers and the wipes and the bottles in bulk because I didn't trust Ryan to notice when we ran low. I made freezer meals on my feet for hours, portioning soups and casseroles into containers so that whoever fed me after the birth wouldn't have to think. I filled out the hospital admission forms twice because I lost the first set under a stack of his mail. I paid the small bills that kept sliding to the bottom of his priority list. I washed the bottles that hadn't even been used yet, just so they'd be ready. And I reminded him, over and over, gently at first and then less gently, that the car seat still wasn't installed, that our son could come at any time, that later was not a plan. Ryan worked as a regional sales manager for Trailhead Gear Co., a company that built its entire brand around outdoor family lifestyle products, tents and coolers and camp chairs photographed with laughing kids and devoted dads roasting marshmallows. He spent his workdays literally selling the idea of family togetherness to strangers, crafting pitch decks about equality time and family memories, and then he came home too tired to bend down and pick up a laundry basket for his own pregnant wife. Most evenings followed the same script. He'd drop his laptop bag by the couch, ask what was for dinner before he asked how I felt, and settle in with his phone before I'd even finished answering. If I told him my back hurt from carrying extra weight all day, he said everyone was tired, like exhaustion was a competition and I'd entered it looking for sympathy. If I told him the baby had been kicking hard enough to take my breath away, he'd say that sounded like a good sign and go right back to scrolling. If I asked him to carry the laundry basket up one single flight of stairs, he sighed like I'd interrupted something important, even though the thing on his screen was usually a golf highlight reel. On weekends, he drove an hour to his parents' house every single Saturday, sometimes Sunday too. His father, Frank, wanted a golf partner or someone to watch football with. His mother, Carol, always had a full meal waiting for her only son, plates piled high like he was still 17 and starving after practice. At first I told myself it was sweet that a grown man who loved his parents wasn't a red flag. Then I started noticing the difference between visiting your parents and running back to people who still treated you like a spoiled boy who'd never had to grow up. Carol had opinions about everything I did. She said I worried too much, rested too much, acted like pregnancy made me fragile, like the discomfort I was in was a performance rather than a fact of my body. She told me, more than once, that women in her generation didn't need constant praise for doing what women were designed to do. Frank chimed in from his recliner that Ryan worked hard and deserved peace, and I wanted to ask, every single time, when exactly I was supposed to receive any peace of my own. But whenever I tried to defend myself, Ryan accused me of disrespecting his family, and the conversation would end there, because apparently his family's comfort outranked my exhaustion every single time. The Friday before everything happened, Ryan came home already irritated because I'd forgotten to order the smoked almonds, protein bars, and craft beer he wanted to bring to his parents' place before the golf weekend. I offered to have it delivered by morning. He said they needed it tonight. When I suggested reasonably, I thought that he stop at the store himself on his way home from work, he looked at me like I'd said something offensive. "You've been home all day," he said, and those 5 words landed like a slap, because home all day had meant laundry and phone calls with the insurance company and swollen feet and heartburn and the low, tightening ache of practice contractions that I hadn't told him about because I didn't want to hear him sigh again. Still, I got in the car. I drove to the store with one hand on the wheel and one hand pressed to my belly, because some stubborn, foolish part of me still wanted to make him happy, still wanted this to be the night he noticed the effort. I bought everything on his list, plus a golf glove he'd mentioned wanting weeks earlier, because I remembered things he'd forgotten he'd said. I stood in the checkout line shifting my weight from one foot to the other while the cashier asked when I was due. "Tomorrow," I almost said, but I smiled instead and told her very soon. In the parking lot, the case of beer was too heavy for me to lift into the trunk, and I stood there pretending to rearrange the other bags, embarrassed, until my neighbor Nora Patel walked over and helped without being asked. She loaded the case herself and asked, casually, where Ryan was. I said he was busy with work, the lie coming out smooth and automatic. Nora looked at me for a second too long and said, gently, "Sarah, busy men can still be decent men." I didn't have a response for that. It followed me the whole drive home, sitting in the passenger seat of my own thoughts like an accusation I couldn't argue with. When I got home, Ryan didn't thank me. He complained I'd bought the wrong brand of almonds. He criticized the pasta salad I'd made for dinner, said his mother's version never tasted this bland, and I reminded him, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be, that I'd been on my feet for hours. He just shook his head like I was making excuses for a mediocre performance. He tried on the golf glove, turned his hand over to admire the fit, and still didn't say thank you. 10 minutes later he packed up the snacks, the beer, and the glove and left for his parents' house because he wanted a normal meal. I sat alone at the kitchen table with a tiny blue bib folded beside my plate, and I remember staring at it and asking myself, silently, why I kept trying to earn love from people who treated my exhaustion as an inconvenience they had to step around. The next evening, Ryan came home smiling in a way that made my stomach tighten before he even said a word, the smile he wore when he'd already made a decision and just wanted me to perform gratitude for being informed of it. I was on the couch with a heating pad against my lower back, finishing thank you cards from the baby shower, hoping he'd come home to tell me he'd finally arranged his paternity leave or called the pediatrician like he'd promised 3 weeks earlier. Instead, he told me his parents had upgraded the trip. Scottsdale, he said. 3 days at a golf resort. His mother had found a package deal and his father had already booked the tee times. I waited for him to laugh, to tell me it was a joke, a bad one, but his face didn't change. "Ryan, my due date is next week," I said. He waved the sentence away like I was describing a minor headache. "Due dates are estimates. Babies come late all the time." Besides, the tickets are non-refundable. I asked if he was serious. He looked offended, like I was the one being unreasonable, and said it was a family trip. I told him our family was about to include a newborn, that our son could come any day now. He sighed like I was being dramatic on purpose, said I wasn't the first pregnant woman in the history of the world, said his own mother had flown while carrying him. I reminded him I wasn't 8 months along, I was one single day from full term, supposed to stay close to a hospital, not 1,000 miles from one. He said if I refused to come, he'd just go without me. I asked, my voice shaking now, if he would really leave me alone this close to labor. He said I had a phone, I had neighbors, I had ride-share apps, I had a hospital 15 minutes away. Then he added that I was turning fatherhood into a prison sentence before the baby had even arrived, like wanting him present for the birth of his own child was some kind of unreasonable punishment. A few minutes later his mother called, and he put her on speaker without even asking if I wanted to hear it. Carol said men needed a moment too, because once the baby came everything would revolve around me and the child. Frank added, from somewhere in the background, that women had babies every day and I'd be fine. Carol told me that if I started acting helpless now, Ryan would never get any peace as a father. I told her peace didn't mean abandoning responsibility. She gave a soft laugh, the kind that sounds polite on the surface but lands like a slap, and told me I'd understand marriage better once I stopped expecting my husband to orbit around me. After the call ended, I told Ryan quietly, and not shouting, just flat and certain, that if he left and something happened, I would not forget it. He asked if that was a threat. I said it was a boundary. He rolled his eyes, but I saw the anger flicker underneath, and from that point forward he treated me like I was punishing him for something. He answered me in short, clipped phrases. He complained about the hospital bag sitting by the door like it was an eyesore instead of a necessity. He installed the car seat wrong out of what I can only describe as spite, then told me to stop nagging him about it. I fixed it myself, kneeling in the open car door, sweating, following an instruction video on my phone while our son pressed painfully against my ribs, while Ryan watched golf highlights through the window like nothing was happening 6 feet away from him. That was the same night Nora came by with chicken noodle soup and banana bread, not because I'd asked, but because she noticed things. She noticed my tired face, the hospital bag by the door, the way I kept pressing my knuckles into my lower back. She asked if I had someone to drive me to the hospital if labor started tonight. I opened my mouth to say my husband, and the words simply wouldn't come out. Nora put her hand over mine and said, "Call me. Day or night. No questions." I almost cried right there on my own porch, because she had offered me more comfort in one sentence than Ryan had offered me in weeks. That night he went out with friends for what he called one last normal evening before fatherhood, saying it like fatherhood was a prison sentence and I was the one locking the cell door. He came home after midnight smelling like beer and fried food and fell asleep without once asking why I was sitting upright in bed with tears on my face. I'd been timing irregular contractions for 2 hours by then. They faded before morning, but the fear didn't. I lay there looking at him sleeping peacefully beside me and understood, with total clarity, that if real labor started tonight, I might still be completely alone in it. The morning he left began with the sound of suitcase wheels scraping across the hallway floor before sunrise. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing through a low, dragging pressure that had woken me. I told him something didn't feel right. He said I was probably just nervous, that I'd worked myself up about the trip. I reminded him my due date was the next day. He said he'd be back before dinner if everything went according to plan, a sentence that almost made me laugh out loud, because nothing about this pregnancy had gone according to any plan except his. He packed protein bars into his carry-on while his phone buzzed against the counter. His mother wanted to know if he'd left yet. His father wanted to know if he'd packed the golf glove. I asked him, one more time, to stay, not forever, just until our son was safely born. He looked irritated instead of guilty. "I can't live my life around your anxiety," he said, and I went quiet, and he took my silence as permission. He wheeled his suitcase out to the SUV and I followed him outside, some stubborn part of me still believing that if he turned and saw me standing there pale and shaking, something in him would finally click into place and remember I was his wife. He shut the trunk. He checked his watch. I opened my mouth to say his name, and that's when the warmth rushed down my legs. I looked down and saw the fluid spreading across my leggings onto the concrete. "My water broke," I whispered, and then louder, "Ryan, my water broke. I need to go to the hospital now." For exactly 1 second, his face went pale with something that looked like real panic. I reached for the passenger door, hoping, that this was finally the moment he chose us. Instead, his eyes dropped to the seat. He grabbed an old towel off the garage shelf and started wiping down the edge of the passenger side before I'd even sat down. I told him the baby was coming. He snapped that he knew, told me to stop yelling. Even though I wasn't yelling, I was terrified. His phone buzzed again. He read the message and cursed under his breath because his parents were already at the gate. I told him to drive me to Mercy General. Less than 20 minutes away. He rubbed both hands down his face and said, "Sarah, listen to me. You'll be fine. Call a taxi or an Uber. The tickets are non-refundable and my parents are waiting." I asked if he was really about to leave his laboring wife standing in the driveway. He said I was making it sound worse than it was, that first babies take hours, that hospitals have staff for exactly this situation, that he'd just be standing around uselessly anyway. Then he asked what I actually expected him to do there, hold my hand while I screamed? Something in me went cold at that. I reached for the door handle and he stepped between me and the car. "Don't get in like that," he said, looking down at my soaked leggings. "I just had the interior cleaned." That's the exact moment I stopped begging. I backed away slowly, one hand gripping the side of the garage as another contraction folded me forward, and Ryan just glanced toward the street like he was embarrassed a neighbor might see us. He didn't look like a husband watching his wife suffer. He looked like a man whose schedule had been rudely interrupted. He got into the SUV and said, "Text me when you're checked in. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is." Then he drove away, and I stood there listening to the engine fade down the block. It was strange how quiet the street felt afterward. A dog barked somewhere. A delivery truck rolled past the end of the road. Life kept moving like my entire world hadn't just cracked open on the concrete. 2 houses down, I didn't yet know that Nora's front door had opened, that her doorbell camera had captured every single second of what had just happened. My phone buzzed one final time, "We'll call when we land. Please don't start drama with my parents," and I stared at the words until they blurred. I wanted to collapse right there, but another contraction reminded me my son still needed me standing. So I called Nora. I could barely get the words out. She said 3 words back, "I'm coming," and less than a minute later she was beside me with towels, a calm voice, and steady hands, helping me into her car, calling ahead to labor and delivery, driving me toward the hospital while I watched my own house disappear behind us and understood, in a way I'd never fully understood before, that a man who abandons you in your weakest moment should never again be trusted with the power to hurt you quietly. Nora drove with the kind of calm that kept me from completely falling apart, not filling the car with panicked questions, just reminding me to breathe, narrating the route to the hospital in a low, steady voice. I found out later she'd once worked as a labor and delivery nurse, which explained why her hands never shook even when mine wouldn't stop. At Mercy General, nurses met us with a wheelchair. When one of them asked if my support person was parking the car, I swallowed hard and said, "My support person is here," and pointed to Nora. The nurse understood immediately, without needing an explanation, and made a note in my file, and asked if there was anyone I didn't want allowed into the room. "My husband," I said. "And his parents." Saying it out loud felt like stepping over some invisible line inside myself. I braced for guilt. What I felt instead was relief, clean and immediate. Nora helped me call my parents, Mark and Linda Bennett, in Denver. My mother answered cheerfully until she heard my voice crack, and after a long, painful silence my father took the phone and told me they were booking the next flight, told me to focus on breathing, promised they were coming. Labor blurred everything after that, pain rising and falling in waves I couldn't predict, my phone lighting up again and again on the tray table beside me. At first Ryan's texts were short and clipped, "Boarding now. Any update? Don't ignore me, Sarah." Then the tone shifted, sharper, more frantic, "Why is mom crying? Did you tell someone? What did you do?" I knew something had started outside that hospital room, some current I couldn't see yet, but I didn't answer any of it. My son needed every ounce of strength I had left. My parents arrived while I was still deep in labor, breathless from the airport, fear written all over both their faces. My mother cried for exactly 1 second and then made herself strong for me. My father kissed my forehead and looked like a man trying very hard not to break in front of me. Nora tried to step back and give the room to family, but I asked her to stay, and she did. Hours later, my son was born screaming, red-faced and furious, like he already somehow knew he'd been disrespected before he'd even opened his eyes. When the nurse laid him on my chest, everything else in the world faded, the driveway, the tickets, the SUV pulling away, all of it disappeared for one sacred, silent minute. My baby was alive. My baby was safe. I whispered, "Noah, you're safe," and in my heart I named him Noah Bennett, tying him first to the people who had actually shown up when it mattered. My mother cried when she heard the name out loud. My father put a hand over his mouth and turned toward the window for a moment. They both understood exactly what I was really saying. I wasn't just naming my son. I was choosing which family he belonged to. After I was moved to recovery, my phone started vibrating again, Ryan, then his mother, then Ryan again. My mother asked if I wanted it turned off. I said not yet. When Ryan called again, I finally answered, and his voice came through in pure panic. "Sarah, what is going on? Why is there a video? Why is everyone messaging me? Did you send something to my company? Honey, talk to me." I waited, actually waited, holding my breath, for one single question. "Is the baby okay? Are you okay? Where are you? Can I come?" Those questions never came. His panic was entirely about himself, his reputation, his vacation collapsing around him in real time. He didn't ask how much pain I'd been in. He didn't ask whether our son was breathing well. He didn't say he was sorry, not once. I looked down at Noah sleeping in my mother's arms, and said, quietly, "Ryan, that's the price you pay." Then I hung up. The room went completely silent. My mother looked proud in a sad, complicated way. My father nodded once, like something had finally been settled. When Nora came back into the room, she asked if I was all right. I looked at my son and told her the truth, "I'm not all right yet. But I'm done being his wife in every way that matters." That evening, hospital staff confirmed no visitors would be allowed without my explicit permission. Ryan came anyway, his parents trailing behind him, but they were stopped cold at the front desk. Carol cried loudly enough that other families in the waiting room turned to look. Frank demanded to speak to someone in charge. Ryan insisted he had rights as the father. None of them reached me. A nurse later told my mother that Ryan kept repeating there had been a misunderstanding. I almost laughed when I heard that. There was no misunderstanding. There was a driveway, a doorbell camera, a laboring woman, and a man who chose a flight over his own son's birth. For once in my life, a closed door protected me instead of trapping me inside somebody else's expectations. The video didn't spread because I wanted attention. I didn't wake up after childbirth and decide to destroy Ryan's life out of spite. He did that entirely on his own. Nora's doorbell camera faced the street and had captured a clear angle of our driveway, Ryan loading the SUV, my water breaking, the argument, his body physically blocking me from the passenger door, the car backing out while I stood there doubled over in pain. The audio was clean enough to catch the exact sentence that would end up defining him online: "Call a taxi or an Uber. The tickets are non-refundable." Nora showed the footage to my parents first, then to me. Watching it once was enough. In my memory, I had simply felt small. On video, I looked abandoned, visibly, unmistakably abandoned, in a way that made my father leave the room and my mother cry without making a sound. Nora offered to delete every copy if I wanted it gone. I told her to save it. At the time I thought I might need it for the divorce. I had no idea the truth was already moving through the world without my permission. Nora had told her husband, David Caldwell, what happened, and David wasn't just our neighbor, he was also a major client and strategic partner of Trailhead Gear Co., the exact company Ryan worked for. Ryan didn't know that, because he'd never bothered to learn much about the people 2 houses down. David didn't threaten anyone or demand anything. He simply asked, in one calm email, whether the company was aware of the kind of judgment their regional sales manager had shown in his own driveway. Meanwhile, Ryan and his parents made everything infinitely worse on their own. Carol left a voicemail accusing me of embarrassing the family, saying a wife shouldn't punish her husband over one misunderstanding. Frank texted my father that childbirth was women's business, and that Ryan had obligations he'd already paid for. Ryan himself sent message after message blaming me for making him look like a monster, insisting I had to fix this before it reached his office, writing that if I really loved our son I wouldn't destroy his father's career before the baby could even recognize his face. Every single word any of them sent became evidence. The story first surfaced in a local moms group without my name attached to it. Someone simply asked whether a woman should forgive her husband for leaving her in labor because his flight tickets were non-refundable. Then the blurred doorbell clip appeared underneath it. No names, no address, no identifying baby information, but people recognized the SUV, recognized the trailhead polo shirt, recognized the airport photo he'd posted that very morning with a caption about equality time with the folks. The story jumped from the moms group to Reddit, then TikTok, then Instagram, gaining speed the way these things do. People started calling him non-refundable dad, pairing his smiling airport photo directly beside the blurred driveway footage. Ryan tried to insist it was all a misunderstanding, but the video, the texts, the hospital admission timestamp, and Noah's recorded birth time made that story impossible to hold together. Trailhead moved fast, because their entire brand identity was built on family values. Their ads showed fathers with toddlers on their shoulders, couples wrapped in blankets around fire pits, mothers laughing on porches. Now people were commenting directly under the company's own posts, asking if abandoning a laboring wife counted as part of the family lifestyle they were selling. David canceled a scheduled strategy lunch and sent Trailhead leadership a short, pointed email about judgment, reputation, and accountability. That single email did more damage than every online comment combined. Ryan was pulled into a video meeting with HR while he was still in Arizona, and he later actually accused me of setting him up because the meeting happened before he'd finished his first round of golf. That detail alone said everything anyone needed to know. He still tried to play golf after learning his son had been born. HR placed him on temporary leave. His quarterly bonus was frozen. His promotion was quietly removed from consideration. David's account was reassigned to another rep. His coworkers stopped replying to his jokes in the group chat. Even the people who used to laugh along with his confidence started calling it arrogance behind his back, once they'd seen what it actually looked like unfiltered. Carol faced her own reckoning once her voicemail and comments spread through her real estate contacts and her church circle. Frank's golf friends started finding reasons to avoid him at the club. One of them had a daughter who was also pregnant, and according to someone close to the family, he told Frank flatly that what Ryan did wasn't old school, it was disgraceful, plain and simple. Social shame hit that family harder than any legal consequence ever could, because reputation had always been their proof of goodness. Now their reputation had become a mirror they couldn't look away from. Ryan tried to regain control the only way he knew how, by calling non-stop. When the hospital blocked his calls, he switched to email. When I stopped answering those two, he started contacting my parents directly. When my father told him all communication would now go through a lawyer, Ryan exploded, calling me unstable, vindictive, hormonal, unfit to make decisions for our son. He demanded I release a public statement calling the video misleading. My attorney, Karen Ellis, read that message and actually smiled, cold and satisfied. She told me men like Ryan were, in a strange way, helpful to her cases, because they believed anger was a form of power, so they kept generating their own evidence without anyone asking them to. She sent formal notice, no direct contact, no harassment, all communication regarding the baby, the separation, property, or custody would go strictly through her office from now on. Ryan responded with one more voicemail, saying that if he came home, maybe I'd forgive him. Might forgive me. I saved that voicemail twice. By then revenge was no longer something I had to chase down, it was simply happening, automatically, because Ryan couldn't stop being exactly who he was. Every defense he offered revealed another ugly truth underneath it. Every excuse became another receipt. While he lost sleep over comment sections and HR meetings and a frozen bonus and a vanishing promotion, I was learning how to feed my son, sleep in fragments, and look at my own reflection without seeing the woman who got left behind in a driveway. By the time I was discharged, Ryan had sent flowers to the hospital, a string of apology emails, a string of accusatory emails, and one long message accusing me of weaponizing motherhood. My parents brought Noah and me to a rental house first, because I wasn't ready to walk back into the house where Ryan had left me standing in the driveway. Nora arranged for a friend of David's, someone with a security background, to be nearby on discharge day, not because we expected actual violence, but because Ryan and his parents had already proven, repeatedly, that they didn't respect boundaries when they were told one. They showed up anyway. Ryan stood near the entrance with red eyes and a bouquet from the gift shop downstairs. Carol clutched a stuffed bear like it was a prop in a play. Frank stood behind them with his arms crossed, silent. When Ryan saw me holding Noah, he stepped forward, and my father moved between us at the exact same moment hospital security did. Ryan said my name like it was supposed to soften something in me. It didn't. Noah slept against my chest while the man who had left us both in that driveway begged, in front of strangers, for a public scene he could twist into sympathy later. I got into my parents' car and left. That was the day Ryan finally understood that access to me was no longer automatic, no longer something he could assume just by showing up. The divorce began quietly but moved fast once it started. Karen Ellis filed for legal separation, primary custody, child support, and a temporary communication order based on Ryan's ongoing harassment. She attached the doorbell footage, the full hospital timeline, the texts, the voicemails, Frank's message to my father, and Ryan's own recorded calls. At first, he refused to cooperate, insisting marriage problems should stay inside the family. Karen replied, flatly, that he was the one who'd involved the airport, the internet, his employer, and both sets of parents, so that particular argument was already over. He said he wanted to see Noah. Karen asked him to agree to supervised visits, mandatory parenting classes, and written communication through a custody app, standard terms for a situation like this. Ryan called that insulting, then admitted, in the same breath, that he didn't really see why babies needed fathers, that early anyway. Karen wrote it down word for word. Later, Ryan requested one phone call to clear the air. I agreed, but only with Karen and my parents present, and only because the call would be legally recorded. He opened by saying this had gone far enough, and that I needed to think about what I was doing to his life. I asked if he wanted to ask about Noah. He paused, then said Noah was a baby and didn't know what was happening, but he did. His job did. His parents did. He complained that Trailhead had frozen his bonus, that David had pulled back from the account, that his mother was crying constantly, that his father couldn't show his face at the club without whispers following him. I told him his choices had consequences, plain and simple. His voice turned sharp. He said I could have just taken the Uber and handled it like an adult. My mother gasped audibly. Karen lifted one finger, a silent reminder to stay calm, and I did. I told Ryan he just confirmed everything I needed to know. He tried to backtrack, said he loved me, said we could start over if I posted a statement saying the video was misleading, said a good mother would want her son to grow up with both parents under one roof. I told him a good mother would never teach her son that love means abandoning someone and then demanding forgiveness for it afterward. I looked down at Noah sleeping against me and realized there was grief left in me, but no confusion anymore. I told Ryan I wasn't coming home, and I ended the call. After that, his own lawyer pushed him towards settlement, knowing a courtroom would only expose more evidence. I received primary physical custody. Ryan received limited, supervised visitation, with the possibility of expanded time only after completing parenting education, counseling, and demonstrating consistent child support payments. All communication had to run through the custody app. Support was calculated off his previous salary, which made him furious all over again. The house was sold, debts divided down the middle, and I kept Noah's furniture, my savings, my car, and every document Ryan once assumed I was too overwhelmed and too pregnant to organize properly. Trailhead eventually let Ryan go during a company restructuring. The official reason listed was poor cultural fit and reputational risk. Ryan told anyone who'd listen that I cost him his career. But even people who rolled their eyes at online drama knew the actual truth. No one made him say the tickets were non-refundable. No one made him block me from the passenger seat. No one made him try to finish a round of golf after learning his son had already been born. He moved back in with Frank and Carol, back into the same house that had taught him men deserve service and women owe silence without complaint. His freelance sales work stayed unstable. The golf trips stopped. Carol stopped posting family quotes online. Frank stopped bragging to his buddies about raising a strong son. Their house, once the place Ryan ran to for comfort every single weekend, became the place where all three of them finally had to sit with the consequences they'd once mocked me for warning them about. I moved to Denver with my parents for Noah's first year. Nora and David stayed close to us the whole time. She visited when Noah was 3 months old and cried the first time he wrapped his tiny fingers around hers. My parents slowly stopped looking at me with fear in their eyes and started looking at me with something closer to hope. I went back to teaching part-time when I felt ready, not to prove I was strong, but because I wanted Noah to grow up watching a mother who rebuilt her life with patience and dignity instead of bitterness. Healing wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was 3 a.m. feedings. It was signing legal paperwork at a kitchen table. It was going to counseling every week and slowly learning to accept help instead of refusing it out of pride. It was learning, piece by piece, not to blame myself for trusting a man who'd hidden his selfishness behind charm for years before I ever saw the driveway version of him. Here's the lesson I want people to actually sit with: character reveals itself exactly at the moment your need interrupts someone else's comfort. Pregnancy, childbirth, illness, grief, fear, none of these are inconveniences to be managed around a golf schedule. They are the exact moments when real love either steps forward or exposes its absence completely. No woman should ever be taught that endurance is the same thing as loyalty when her safety and her child's future are actually on the line. No man should be praised for providing money if he refuses to provide care when it actually costs him something. Noah will grow up understanding that responsibility isn't optional, and that apologies mean absolutely nothing without changed behavior behind them. I want him to understand that strength isn't cruelty, that boundaries aren't revenge, and that protecting someone vulnerable is one of the clearest, quietest signs of real love that exists. Ryan believed I would forgive anything to keep our family looking intact from the outside. He forgot that my son became my entire family the second he took his first breath in that hospital room. So if you were in my place, one day away from giving birth, watching your husband drive off because his golf tickets were non-refundable, would you forgive him for the sake of peace? Or would you choose your child, your dignity, and your future? Thank you for watching another story from our channel. Please remember that this video is a fictional dramatization, created for reflection and educational storytelling. We hope it reminds you that your worth never decreases just because someone else failed to appreciate it, and sometimes the people who let you down are simply clearing the way for a better life.